I never imagined that at 73 years old, I'd spend Thanksgiving staring at a plastic container of cold mashed potatoes and wondering where I went wrong as a father. The doorbell had rung at 4:30 p.m., and my heart had leaped. Maybe Sarah had changed her mind. Maybe she'd come to pick me up for dinner after all. Instead, I opened the door to find a young delivery driver holding a small white bag. "Delivery for Mr. Henderson," he'd asked, looking uncomfortable as he handed me what felt like a cruel joke wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a styrofoam container with portions so small they wouldn't feed a child some congealed gravy, a scoop of stuffing that had already started to dry out, and 3 thin slices of turkey that looked like they'd been scraped from the bottom of the platter. No note, no explanation. When it just leftovers delivered like I was some charity case she'd remembered at the last minute. I stood in my empty kitchen, the silence pressing against my ears like water. Through the window, I could see the Martinez family next door carrying covered dishes between their cars, their laughter floating on the crisp November air. Children ran across their lawn wearing their Sunday best, while grandparents shuffled slowly but surely toward the warm glow of their front door. And here I was, holding my daughter's scraps, realizing that somewhere along the way, I had become nothing more than an obligation to be checked off her list. The container felt cold in my hands, but not as cold as the growing certainty that this wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was a message. Sitting at my dining room table, picking at those meager leftovers with a plastic fork, the memories came flooding back like a dam had burst. I remembered Sarah at 8 years old, climbing into my lap while I balanced the checkbook, asking why Daddy looked so worried. Even then, I never told her how I was working 16-hour days at the plant, taking every overtime shift I could get, just to keep up with the mortgage and her dance lessons. When she wanted to go to Stanford, I didn't hesitate. I cashed in my retirement fund, took out a second mortgage on the house, and worked 3 jobs to make it happen. While other fathers my age were planning fishing trips and early retirement, I was driving Uber until midnight, then getting up at 5 a.m. to stock shelves at the grocery store before my regular shift at the factory. "You're going to get that education," I'd told her, watching her face light up with possibilities. "You're going to have opportunities I never had." And she did. She graduated summa cum laude, landed that corporate job in the city, married that slick investment banker who never quite met my eyes when we shook hands. I bought her wedding dress, paid for half the reception, and when they needed a down payment on their first house, guess who emptied his savings account one more time? But now, as I scraped the last bit of cold stuffing from the container, I couldn't remember the last time she'd called just to check on me. Couldn't remember the last time she'd invited me to dinner, or asked how I was feeling, or seemed to notice that I was growing old in this house all by myself. I had given her everything, and somehow, along the way, she had learned to take it all for granted. The worst part wasn't even the leftovers themselves, it was that she couldn't be bothered to bring them personally. I kept thinking about that delivery driver, probably some college kid making minimum wage, having to carry out what felt like the most humiliating errand of my life. Did she even tell him what he was delivering? Did she think about how it would feel for an old man to receive his Thanksgiving dinner through a stranger? I walked to the window and watched the neighborhood come alive with celebration. The Johnsons had 3 generations packed into their small living room, and I could see them through their bright windows, passing dishes and sharing stories. Mrs. Chen from down the street was helping her elderly mother navigate the front steps, moving slowly but with such tenderness that it made my chest ache. Even the young couple who'd moved in last spring had invited the widow. From the corner house, I'd seen her earlier, carrying what looked like a homemade pie, wearing her best dress and a smile that hadn't dimmed despite losing her husband just 6 months ago. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to understand what this day was supposed to mean, everyone except my own daughter. I tried to eat what she'd sent, but everything tasted like cardboard mixed with disappointment. The turkey was dry, the potatoes were gummy, and the stuffing had that peculiar flavor of food that had sat too long under warming lights. Even the leftovers told a story. These weren't carefully saved portions from a loving meal. These were the dregs, the bits that would have gone into the trash if she hadn't remembered, at the last possible moment, that she had a father spending the holiday alone. Then my phone sat silent on the counter. No call to ask if the food had arrived safely. No message to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. Nothing to suggest that I had crossed her mind again after she'd handed that bag to the delivery service. At 7:30 that evening, I finally swallowed my pride and called her. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, and I could hear the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background, the soundtrack of a family celebration I wasn't invited to join. "Hi, Dad," she said, and I could tell immediately that I was an interruption. Her voice had that distracted quality it always got when she was multitasking, probably checking her phone or clearing dishes while we talked. "I wanted to thank you for the dinner," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "It was thoughtful of you to remember me." "Of course. I knew you'd be hungry," she replied, and I could hear someone calling her name in the background. "Listen, Dad, I'm kind of in the middle of things here. Richard's parents are visiting, and his mother made this incredible stuffing recipe that's been in their family for generations. We're having such a wonderful time." Richard's parents, the in-laws she barely knew, got a seat at her table, got to taste family recipes and share in the warmth of her home. But her own father got delivery leftovers and a rushed phone call. I was hoping maybe I could stop by, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Even just for a few minutes. I haven't seen you and oh Dad, that's not really going to work today. We have such a full house, and Richard's family has been planning this visit for months. Maybe we can get lunch sometime next week. I'll have my assistant check my calendar. Her assistant. She needed to check with her assistant to find time for her father, Sarah. But she was already wrapping up the conversation. I've got to run, Dad. The dessert course is starting, and Richard's mother brought this amazing pumpkin tart from that French bakery downtown. Love you, talk soon. The line went dead, and I stood there listening to the dial tone, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. Love you, talk soon words she threw out like spare change, meaningless and automatic. In the background of that call I had heard the life I'd helped her build, the comfortable world I'd sacrificed everything to give her, and in that world there was no room for the man who'd made it all possible. Asterisk, asterisk, as I sat in my recliner that night, staring at the dark television screen, my mind drifted to Emma, my younger daughter. While Sarah was building her empire in the city, Emma was working as a nurse at the county hospital, pulling long shifts and still finding time to check on me twice a week. Just last Sunday, she'd shown up at my door with a pot roast and that mischievous smile that reminded me so much of her mother. You're not eating enough vegetables, Dad, she'd scolded, unpacking groceries I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. When's the last time you had a home-cooked meal that didn't come from a can? Emma never made a big show of her kindness. She didn't announce her visits or expect praise for them. She just appeared, like sunshine breaking through clouds, making my kitchen smell like love again as she cooked and chatted about her patients. Her boyfriend Jake, the funny thing that happened at work that week. I remembered the time I'd caught pneumonia 2 winters ago. Sarah had sent flowers and a get well card signed by her secretary, but Emma had taken vacation days to sit by my hospital bed, sneaking in homemade soup despite the no outside food rules, reading to me from the newspaper when my eyes were too tired to focus. You raised us to take care of each other, Emma had said when I tried to protest her sacrifices. Mom would have done the same thing. Emma understood something her sister had forgotten, that money and gifts could never replace presence, that showing up mattered more than showing off. She made a third of what Sarah earned, lived in a modest apartment instead of a mansion, drove a 10-year-old Honda instead of a BMW, but when I needed her, she was there, always. Tonight, while I'd eaten cold leftovers alone, Emma had been working a double shift at the hospital, probably missing her own Thanksgiving dinner to take care of strangers' grandparents. That was who she was, the daughter who had inherited her mother's heart, not just her father's checkbook. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I found myself wandering through the house in the dark, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. My wife and I had refinished together 40 years ago. Every room held memories, every piece of furniture told a story. The grandfather clock in the hallway had been my father's, the china cabinet held my mother's wedding dishes, the oak dining table where I'd done homework with both girls, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and report cards. All of it was supposed to go to Sarah as the eldest child. I'd made that decision years ago, back when both my daughters were still young and the future seemed clearer. The eldest inherits the family home, carries on the traditions, keeps the memories alive for the next generation. It was the way things had always been done in my family, the natural order that I'd never questioned. But as I stood in my study at 2 a.m., looking at the safe where I kept my will and estate documents, that natural order felt as cold and stale as the leftovers I'd choked down for dinner. I opened the safe with trembling fingers and pulled out the thick manila folder that contained my life's work, the deed to the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance policies, the detailed instructions for dividing everything I'd spent 7 decades accumulating. Sarah's name was everywhere, inheriting not just the bulk of my estate but the responsibility of being the family's anchor, the keeper of our history. But what good was tradition when it rewarded ingratitude? What was the point of leaving everything to someone who had already shown me exactly how little I meant to her? I thought about Sarah's reaction when she eventually learned about her inheritance. Would she feel grateful? Or would she simply see it as her due? Another entitlement in a life full of them. Sitting at my desk, I spread the documents out under the lamplight and really looked at them for the first time in years. Every signature represented a choice, and I was beginning to understand that I still had the power to make different choices. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but my resolve was getting stronger with each passing minute. Part 7. A visit to the lawyer 3 days after Thanksgiving. I called Margaret Winters, the family attorney who had been handling my affairs since my wife passed away. Margaret was my age, a sharp woman who had built her practice on treating her clients like family, and I trusted her judgment completely. "Robert, what a pleasant surprise," she said when I walked into her office that Tuesday morning. "You look troubled. Everything all right?" I'd practiced what I was going to say during the drive over, but sitting across from Margaret's desk, the words felt heavier than I'd expected. "I need to make some changes to my will," I said finally. "Significant changes." Margaret leaned back in her leather chair, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been practicing law long enough to know that family dynamics could shift like quicksand, and she'd probably seen this scenario play out more times than she cared to count. I told her about Thanksgiving, about the pattern of neglect that had been building for years, about Emma's constant kindness and Sarah's increasing indifference. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad, her face revealing nothing of what she was thinking. "Are you certain about this?" she asked when I finished. "This is a substantial estate we're talking about. The house alone is worth nearly $500,000, and that doesn't include your investments and life insurance." Sarah is going to be ... surprised. Sarah is going to be furious, I corrected. But that's not my problem anymore. I've spent too many years worrying about Sarah's feelings while ignoring Emma's sacrifices. Margaret walked me through the legal implications, made sure I understood the finality of what I was doing. She explained how the new will would work, what protections we could put in place to prevent challenges, how to ensure my wishes would be carried out exactly as I specified. "I'll need a few days to draft everything properly," she said as we shook hands at the end of our meeting. "But Robert, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Gratitude isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn." As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The decision was made, the wheels were in motion, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly taking care of my family, both the daughter who deserved everything and the one who deserved nothing. The universe has a sense of irony that would be funny if it weren't so painful. 2 weeks after I'd changed my will, Sarah called to invite me to lunch, the first time she'd initiated contact since Thanksgiving. She wanted to meet at that expensive steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear ties and the wine costs more than most people's grocery budget. I should have known she had an agenda. Sarah looked radiant when I arrived, her designer clothes and perfect makeup making me acutely aware of my own worn sweater and scuffed shoes. She kissed my cheek with a kind of affection that felt performed rather than felt, then launched into animated chatter about her latest promotion, a new office with a corner view, the vacation home she and Richard were considering in the Hamptons. "You've done so well for yourself," I said, and I meant it. Watching her success should have filled me with pride, but instead, I felt like I was looking at a beautiful stranger who happened to share my DNA. It wasn't until after the main course that she got to her real purpose. "Dad, I've been thinking about the future," she said, her voice taking on that carefully casual tone people use when they're about to discuss something important. "Richard and I have been talking to a financial planner, and we want to make sure we're being responsible about inheritance planning." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Inheritance planning, nothing morbid." She laughed, but her eyes were calculating. "It's just smart to be prepared. We want to make sure we understand what kind of estate we'll be managing someday, how to minimize tax implications, that sort of thing. The house alone must be worth quite a bit now. With the way property values have climbed in this neighborhood, there it was the real reason for this lunch. Dressed up in concern for tax efficiency and financial responsibility. She wasn't asking about my health or my happiness or whether I was lonely rattling around in that big house by myself. She was conducting a business meeting about her future assets. "I see," I said carefully. "And what conclusions have you and Richard reached?" Sarah leaned forward, her enthusiasm unmistakable. "Well, we think it makes sense to start transitioning some assets sooner rather than later. Maybe put the house in a trust, or even consider selling it and moving you into one of those nice senior communities. The equity could be invested more efficiently, and you'd have less to worry about with maintenance and upkeep." Less to worry about. She wanted to sell the house where I'd raised my family, where her mother had died, where every room held 40 years of memories, because it would be more convenient for her portfolio management. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "That's very thoughtful of you to be so concerned about my financial future. I just want what's best for you, Dad," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand with the kind of condescending affection you'd show a confused child. "And honestly, Emma's never been very good with money. It's probably better if the important decisions are handled by people who understand these things." The casual dismissal of her sister, the assumption that Emma was somehow less capable of handling responsibility, the breathtaking arrogance of planning my life around her convenience, it all crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. Sarah wasn't just taking me for granted anymore. She was actively planning to erase me. "You're absolutely right," I said, smiling. "It's so important to plan for the future. You never know when things might not turn out the way you expect." The call came on a rainy Thursday in March. I'd been battling a persistent cough for weeks, and when it developed into pneumonia, Emma insisted on taking me to the emergency room. What started as a precautionary visit turned into a 5-day hospital stay that scared us all more than anyone wanted to admit. Sarah showed up on the 3rd day, looking harried and checking her phone constantly, as if my bedside was just another appointment she needed to get through. Emma had been there every evening after her own shifts, sometimes falling asleep in the uncomfortable visitor's chair rather than leaving me alone. "The doctors say you're going to be fine," Sarah announced, as if she was delivering news I hadn't already heard. "But this really makes it clear that we need to have those conversations we talked about the house." about making sure everything is properly organized. Even lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, she was thinking about her inheritance. That's when I made the decision to tell them, both about the changes I'd made to my will. I could have waited, could have let it all come out after I was gone, but something about Sarah's bedside manner made me want to see her reaction while I was still around to enjoy it. Actually, I've already taken care of that, I said, gesturing for Emma to come closer. Margaret Winters has all the updated documents. Emma, you should know that the house and the majority of the estate will be coming to you now. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went white, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. But Sarah's reaction was something else entirely. Her perfectly composed mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly and grasping underneath. What do you mean, coming to Emma? Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting through the steady beep of the heart monitor. Dad, you can't be serious. Emma doesn't know how to manage that kind of responsibility. She doesn't understand investments or property management, or she understands kindness. I interrupted. She understands what it means to show up for someone you love, not just when it's convenient or profitable, but when it matters. She's earned this. Sarah, every bit of it. Sarah stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the linoleum floor. This is insane. You're making a huge mistake based on some sentimental. Based on years of watching which daughter actually gives a damn about her father. My voice was stronger than it had been in days. Based on who brought me soup when I was sick, who calls to check on me, who doesn't send her Thanksgiving dinner through a delivery service because she can't be bothered to see me in person. Emma was crying now, not from joy but from the terrible weight of realizing how badly her sister had failed us both. Dad, I don't need. Yes, you do, I said firmly. You need to know that your kindness hasn't gone unnoticed. You need to know that there are consequences for how we treat the people who love us. And Sarah needs to learn that entitlement isn't the same as inheritance. I left the hospital with a clean bill of health and a clear conscience. The pneumonia had passed, but something fundamental had changed in the relationships between my daughters. Sarah stopped visiting entirely, communicating only through terse text messages about consulting with her attorney and exploring her options. Emma, meanwhile, seemed overwhelmed by the responsibility she'd inherited, insisting she didn't want or need the money. Keep it all, she'd said on the drive home from the hospital. I never did any of those things expecting to be paid for them. That's exactly why she deserved it. I spent my remaining months, and they were good months, full of Emma's laughter and Jake's terrible cooking experiments and the kind of simple contentment I'd forgotten was possible, writing letters to both my daughters. Sarah's letter was short and direct, an explanation of my reasoning, an acknowledgement that I'd failed her by teaching her that love could be bought and sold, and a hope that someday she'd understand the difference between taking care of someone and taking from them. Emma's letter was longer, full of memories and gratitude and instructions for the garden she'd always loved. I told her about her mother's dreams for that house, about the traditions worth keeping and the ones worth changing, about how to turn inheritance into legacy when my time finally came. In my sleep, on a warm Sunday morning in late spring, I knew I'd made the right choice. Emma found both letters on my nightstand, along with a copy of my will and a small box containing her mother's engagement ring. Sarah contested the will, of course. She hired expensive lawyers and made compelling arguments about undue influence and diminished capacity. But Margaret Winters had done her job well, and more importantly, the truth was obvious to anyone who cared to look. The hospital records showed dozens of visits from Emma, none from Sarah until those final days. The neighbors testified about who had been coming around to check on the old man, who had been bringing groceries and staying for dinner. In the end, the court upheld my wishes. Emma inherited the house where she'd grown up, the investments I'd carefully tended, the responsibility of carrying our family forward. Sarah received exactly what she'd given me in those final years, a token gesture, a small bequest that acknowledged our relationship without rewarding her neglect. The last I heard, Sarah had moved to California with Richard, chasing some new opportunity that would help her forget the embarrassment of being written out of her father's will. Emma still lives in the family house, now married to Jake, with a baby on the way and my wife's rose bushes blooming in the front yard. Justice, I learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about making sure love and loyalty are rewarded, that kindness compounds into something lasting and beautiful. Sometimes it's about teaching the people you love that there are consequences for how they treat each other, and that gratitude, not entitlement, is what builds a legacy worth leaving behind. I gave my daughters everything I had to give, but only one of them understood that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, it's the knowledge that you are truly loved, and the responsibility to pass that love forward to the next generation. In the end, that's the only gift that really matters. That's the only revenge that feels like justice.